All right, we are going to get started. It is 7 o'clock, so we'll start on time. And I'll ask Kim to lead us in the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you all. It's only been a week between meetings, so I'm sure our last meeting is fresh in your mind.
I feel like I'll be left for a bathroom break in the back already.
So speaking of meetings, just to jump right into the agenda here, it's some housekeeping. Talking with Mark about our meeting schedule, our next scheduled meeting is December 2nd, the week after vacation. And it's not likely that Mark will have time to prepare for the next sort of round of budget discussions for that date. So I'd like to check in with the board as to whether or not we can move our December meetings. Currently, they're scheduled for the 2nd and the 23rd.
2nd and 16th.
I mean, sorry, 2nd and 16th. Yeah, sorry. So what I would like to propose is that we actually have do what we did this month, which is to have the 9th and the 16th. Does that represent a conflict for anyone?
Let's go for it.
Okay.
My only question would be,
thanks, I'll have to change that.
Will we get done what needs to get done in that 1 week time? And I can't see me personally. I don't know what needs to happen between the 9th and the 6th budget-wise.
One idea would be the 9th would to present a more of a presentation around program investment and things we're trying to accomplish with the budget, and then the 16th, I think we'll have a better sense of revenue at the state end by the 14th, I think. So that'll be more of a numbers presentation. It'll immediately follow if that's what we're prepared to do that if the board would like to hear more detail about program. Although you've gotten an earful over the last month and a half, but
Right.
Similar to what we did last year, it would be a presentation by principals Ellen, Jessica, and myself.
works for
On
me.
the 9th.
Does that sound?
Actually works better for me, quite honestly.
Okay, great. Sure. So that's what we'll do. We will have 2 meetings in December, but they'll take place on the 9th and the 16th as opposed to the 2nd and the 16th. So one item I would like to also bring to your attention is that come April, 2 members of the board, their terms will be expiring, your term and my term. Yeah, so just to kind of raise that on everyone's radar, that we'll have 2 board members whose terms are up, and I haven't talked to you about what your plans are, and I'm not going to talk yet about my plans. I'm still pondering. So, but it would be a good time to begin thinking about if there are other folks that you know of that might be interested in running for the school board. It's probably a good time to start thinking about that sooner rather than later. So just keep that in mind. Any other comments from board members or acknowledgements? David.
Last Thursday, I went to the principals' roundtable at the elementary school. Very well attended. 3 principals, 3 parents, 1 grandparent, school board member. That was it. It was interesting presentation. A lot of what we at the board have already gone through with the Common Core standards, what it means,
Okay,
preparation, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Other comments or acknowledgements? Yes.
I'll grab the easy one.
Yeah.
Love the new sign.
Yes, the
It's
new sign.
fantastic.
Yeah, very nice.
Classy, isn't it?
It surprised me that it happened so quickly, but
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
the first time I drove out. I was like, nice.
That looks good.
So
Yeah, it
that's
took
great.
probably 6 weeks to. Hey, Jess.
Great.
6 to 8 weeks to build, but it took all of 45 minutes to put in.
Install.
The weather's been cooperative as well.
Right.
Yeah, really, it looks great.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I think we talked about this. It can't be lit, right? Like, coming in at night, it was hard to see, but.
The town
I thought
frowns
that you guys
upon
had
lighting,
mentioned that.
Yeah.
backlighting of
But,
any kind,
yeah.
yeah.
Any other comments, acknowledgements? Great. We'll move on to our consent agenda for the evening. Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Great. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 5-0. And so we'll jump right into the first round here, talking about our FY15 rollover budget, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Ellen is, I think, looks forward to the opportunity to work with me on the PowerPoint presentation. So Ellen,
Right here, Mark.
wanna
I'm
work
right
with
here,
it?
yes. I'm right here.
you want to channel through my shoulder? Or do you want to
Yeah,
come up
I
to
will.
the table?
I think-
No.
Would you like to join us? Yeah,
I'd like to invite Roger to the
of course.
Roger George. I have a copy of this for you. You can't look at it before I'm through.
Because that's all we'll do is
Yes. So this is similar to the approach we've taken the last couple of years. The goal is to inform the board on what the next year's budget looks like, fiscal year 15, based on what we know already. And these are costs associated, mostly the largest number, as you know, cost driver has to do with personnel, and our best guesstimate on other things that we know we're going to be having to commit to through the budget next year, FY15. So we've put together a number of slides. I want to set the context first in terms of some of why the investments we're putting into through the budget are helping. Then we've got a series of 3 slides that'll show you some comparative data from year to year, and then what a revenue picture looks like, some of the cost drivers, and then end with sort of a general view of what I hope to bring forward on the 9th of December around additional investments if the community can afford it. Once again, I wish I could tell you it's a simple exercise to go through. It's not. It's a finite resource, and the ends policies have to do with meeting the needs of all kids based on your policies at a cost the community can afford. And so that weighs heavy on my mind as I present this information to you tonight, and what we look forward to for a first draft budget on the 9th. The state legislature, among other things, has not even met yet to talk about things like the base rate in education and the state tax rate. We're told that we can expect to see those be adjusted, and as that tax rate goes up, it affects us at the local level. So, I don't want to be too presumptuous coming forward on our first round of the budget, but at least what we're hearing from Montpelier, we can be prepared to see those taxes be adjusted at the local level. And I don't have anything bouncing around.
no sound effects.
No sound effects. You've seen these before, but not knowing who we'd have for an audience, glad to see Jessica here. I wanted to talk about this year, the systems approach, in that we've been engaged in for a couple of years now, because good systems, when aligned and connected in an interdependent way, it helps kids achieve high standards. And I could share, like I did last time we met, the achievements of our students, but the supposition here is when these systems become better developed and enhanced, the outcomes for kids are going to be that much greater. And we are proud to say that based on the indicators that we gather around kids' readiness for their next stage of their life, 9th grade and beyond, that 80% or greater are either self-reporting or grades or statewide assessments are suggesting those kids are meeting that standard. Still not acceptable because it doesn't mean 100%, but I believe that the systems that we're investing in are really having a positive effect on growth. So tomorrow, for example, we're taking the entire leadership team down to one of 3 sessions, maybe 4 sessions, working with an outside national consultant on developing our skills as building-based and district leaders, around making sure we're providing effective feedback to educators on their practice. And now that our system is better aligned with curriculum, comes the challenge of really examining our practices in the classroom, and as leaders, how do we affect positive change through teacher development. So what's really cool about Essex is that we learn together. It's not Mark going off or Ellen going off or Jessica going off or Kevin going off. We do a lot of things together outside of the district in terms of developing our skills. And tomorrow, again, we're out in front, I think, in terms of making sure we're at the table at the right time to understand how our jobs are going to change as school leaders to affect change in the classroom. We've talked a lot about the curriculum alignment. Again, I'm very proud of the work that we've done. I'm concerned about the pressure it's put on educators because their jobs are so busy as it is, and then to put on the extra burden of aligning curriculum. But I really feel after Tuesday afternoon, Ellen promises me we will have our curricula aligned with ELA and mathematics. And as you heard last week, we're well on our way to have those aligned with national science standards as well. So that's really a good body of work. And now the fun begins in terms of looking at lesson unit development and the lessons we're going to bring forward at the classroom level. But we've invested a lot of resources in human capital to get to this point, and we've come a long way in the last couple of 3 years. Our systems of monitoring have improved. Jessica led an effort this summer, as we've talked about, the multi-tiered system of support and better aligning our systems K-8 to make sure that we're monitoring those kids. The data wall presentation got at that. Those monitoring systems are ongoing and embedded in the work that we do today. It's not waiting until the end of the trimester and see if the kid made it or not. Our assessment practices and our commitment through a PLC structure has allowed us to monitor those kids' progress more frequently. And again, that's a big systems shift that's occurred here in the last number of years. Our professional development, needs-based is sort of a buzzword, but no longer is it acceptable for teachers and leaders just to do whatever they want to do, that it's got to be based on the needs of students. And so through our monitoring, we know where we need to get better as practitioners in the classroom and as school leaders. And so our professional development, if you will, is more embedded in the work that we're doing. Even though, for example, it's tough for teachers to do the curriculum writing, in that activity itself is the opportunity to learn from one another, to be able to put those documents together, in fact, is a learning opportunity. With Libby's position the last 2 years, and now Hillary Kissel's position, soon to be, we've been embedding our math coaching, and I'll talk about that as a position for next year. All of that is really starting to pay off in terms of teacher development. That's special ed. Sorry, no disrespect, but I ran out of room. That's SPED, no relation to ed, but Jessica's brought to the district an incredibly thoughtful and comprehensive monitoring of performance of the organization, and holding us much more accountable to making sure that we're spending the money and following the money in a way that's prudent and much more understandable by all the different stakeholders, including yours truly. I'm feeling really good about that process. Our Medicaid dollars, for instance, are the highest they've been in how many years? A number. And again, I attribute that to Jessica's work, and Tina Carroll, who's also just doing tremendous work at the district level. And again, of course, that is meeting the needs of children, but it's also saving money that we otherwise would be shorting ourselves with revenue. Increase access to quality preschool, again, another system that we're investing in. We have 10 partners now. Our goal at some point is universal access for all families who want to access preschool. And we'll talk about that in the context of our budget as well. But our numbers are climbing without any effect on our taxes at the local level. So that's very exciting, knowing that high quality early education is one of the main drivers for kids' readiness for kindergarten. You have in your report tonight, we'll talk about it a little bit, 2.3. We've invested in this infrastructure of our schoolhouses and our campuses around safety and security, and that in the long run is going to really pay off, I think, for our kids and families and adults working in the buildings. We need to continue to effectively support the integration of technology, that this is the future in many ways. I was sharing with Kim and another person who attended the superintendent rectangle table today in central office. Yeah. We had an opportunity, several of us, to sit with the director of student assessment at the state level last Friday, and it's overwhelming what the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium's put together for the next iteration of statewide assessment. There's a large slug of computer-based technology that will help kids better access the test material and start sort of where they are as an individual learner. And it's just phenomenal where we've come from the days when the first state assessment came out, New Standards Reference Exam. I remember the in-service used to be how to put them in boxes and pack them up. And now we sit through 4 hours of SBAC, and it's amazing the transformation that's happened with statewide assessment. And Ellen's, you know, as veteran as I am, and she too remembers the days of a good shot at New Standards reference exam, and that was back in the late 90s. And oh my gosh, where we've come. So the integration of technology is not only about taking state assessments, but the point is that it's all around us, and we can't leave our kids short in the use of that in their learning. And finally, we still have a long way to go. I'll give you an update on the cafeteria and recess conversation I had last week. But it speaks to me the continued importance to look at the systems that support really effective parent engagement. I think we've made some good strides in that area, but we have a long way to go. I'm glad we had 3 members and a grandparent, 3 parents and a grandparent, and that's really great. But I want to have 33. You know, we want to, whatever we can do to get people engaged and being part of the great conversation, the better it will be. So the point of this slide again, in advance of the budget, is to let you know the board has done a great job in investing in these systems that are more finely tuned and tied together for opportunities to learn for kids. And I think we've come a long way in the last number of years, and it's good, really good work. Okay, it's Roger's turn. So we have a couple slides. One is to review. Yeah, I get to do the fun
I
stuff.
see how this works.
And what Roger and I have worked on these slides, and there's nothing you haven't seen before, but we want to review some information we think will be helpful for you. You want to use this, Roger?
No.
Okay, there's that button there. Just ask Ellen if you know.
Looking at our cost drivers each year, it's no surprise that being a human services organization, that salaries always leads the list. The increase compared to the current year budget is a bit less than it was a year ago at this time. Health insurance, we're pleased to hear that the projected rate increase is only about 4.5%. That's the estimate on the table this time. It'll hopefully be finalized sometime in December. So we have included some money for the Affordable Health Care Act in case additional current employees who don't presently take insurance decide to come onto the school district insurance, and a couple other fees that might be involved. Generally, we don't include on the cost driver list an item where we have a decrease, but for special services in the coming year, exclusive of any additional personnel, the cost for outside services that are needed to support our youngsters will be less in the coming year than what was budgeted this year. So we left that item on for your information. Technology, equipment, and services. Of course, Ellen will be speaking more to that in the future, but you saw a 5-year plan a year ago that presented increased need for equipment expenditures in the future, and some of the services that are involved have also gone up a bit in price. Professional development, we've tried to hold that line pretty constant in prior budgets. Last year our actual expense was quite a bit higher than the budgeted amount, so in the coming year we're looking to raise the budget to be more in line with the needs that our staff have had for coursework and workshops and conferences. Transportation, our transportation contract is in the final year of a 3-year request for proposal, so we know the amount of that increase. Also, our fuel allocation has come up a little short last year by the end of the year, so that needed to be increased. Together, the contract and the fuel increases result in about a 4.5% increase compared to what was budgeted this year. Mark already spoke to the pre-K program this year with Jessica's wise encouragement, we did get a grant from the Vermont Community Foundation that allowed us to increase the number of youngsters being served in this current year. That increase for next year basically holds the same number of students, but reflects the budget-to-budget increase. Our actual.
I think it was gentle arm twisting from Jesse.
You went.
Whatever it takes.
Exactly.
We don't turn any surprise checks like that away, though. So. Each year we have to budget some funds beyond the basic salary lines to cover if people require leaves of absence for various reasons, if there's any payments to retirees, and also for those that have completed additional graduate credit and receive salary increases for those reasons. So that line has been increased in the coming year. Utilities, that increase is very small. We've often talked about that one in the past. Our expenses, or our actual expenses last year were a bit lower than what was budgeted for this year, so I had hoped to be able to decrease utilities a little bit, but then just recently we received notice that for our 2 schools that we qualify for special discounts for, Founders in the middle school, because they have a alternate source of fuel if we need to use that as a backup fuel oil. The natural gas rate for those alternate fuel customers is increasing next year by about 30%.
Wow.
So that 30% results in the $8,400 increase.
So we got an increase in our rate because we have the option of using a
Well, we
different
were
source?
getting a very preferential rate because we have agreed to use fuel oil in an emergency situation if we needed to, but the utility is determined that there's a reason to increase that very preferential rate. It's still less than the rate that we pay
Okay.
at the elementary school, but it's
So
not as nice.
We're not getting penalized. We're being bonused less.
That's an excellent way.
Okay. All right.
Just even less of a bonus.
When I
Have
I
we been
was-
requested to switch from natural gas to furnace oil at the 2 schools?
no.
Thank you.
Every year or two, they give us some notice and ask us to change, just to prove that we can change, and it gives us a good opportunity to make sure that our systems are in order. But in the past 6 years, we've not had to use fuel oil. And lastly, that famous other line, all the miscellaneous plus and minuses totaling some 58,000, that result in our, what you'll see to be our total budget increase of $720,000. Questions?
Two real quick ones. One on the health insurance, including ACA contingency. How much of that 119 is ACA contingency?
Quite honestly, the bulk of it is. We're in a position this year, you might recall, last year we budgeted a health insurance increase of 12.5%. That was the guidance that was given to us, but they weren't able, Visbit was not able to land the final rate before we determined our budgets. The rate came in at 10%. So we already had budgeted more for this year than what our actual bill is. So that helps smooth out or lessen the budget-to-budget increase next year.
And on the special services, not that I ever mind a negative number on this column, but why? Why are we saving $80,000 on special services? Do you know?
Well, changes in student enrollment and outside services required. I think
Okay, so
the
the student
simple.
enrollment is
Yeah,
Specific
they're
student needs.
specific.
Okay, cool.
Roger, the 119, we had a number of how many plans that might include.
That again, there's more to it than just that, but I've figured if we had to take on an additional 6 family
Yeah.
plans.
Because what you're hearing from Laura Soares is when this really kicks into gear, there might be spouses of current employees who opt to come onto our plan because of the exchange, and, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
we're gonna have to.
again,
And
it's
actually, I
also-
might add, I'm taking quite a conservative approach on that health insurance at this point. There are models that would suggest that we include or budget greater contingencies, but yet at this point, just 7 months prior to our new fiscal year, I don't see specific proof or need that we have to go a great deal more, but we can stay tuned.
And if let's say we decide on a budget amount, and then something dramatic happens where that we receive a flood of requests to join our insurance plan, we don't necessarily have to approve all of those, do we? We don't have to take those people onto our plan.
Yes,
Or you pay a
We do.
fine. Isn't there a significant
Interesting.
fine
I mean,
if you
it's
don't?
they're under their
Yeah.
contractual right to. Yeah,
To
have
opt in
them
on
Get a
whatever
plan,
time they want,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
And
2 times a year they can do that.
Right.
the plan becomes effective January 1. When do they elect benefits here?
Open enrollment is in the month of December and June for effective dates of January 1st or July 1st. And we have very few changes mid-year each year, so the biggest change is July 1st. And actually, we don't have that many changes in current employees changing plans typically, so.
But this would constitute a trigger event to allow them to change their plan because something changed for their spouse or partner.
Correct, yes.
And that's why we would
Mhm.
potentially see off-cycle changes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
This is the budget slide that you've seen in past years. Again, we're showing the going back to FY11. One change tonight compared to some of our prior looks at this information for both FY13 and 14. I've just included in the base budget the amount that went into the reserve fund, capital reserve each year. Ultimately, that with the reserve approved by voters, that becomes the budget that is presented to the state, and so all the tax rates and everything are inclusive of the voter approval of a contribution to the capital reserve in both FY13 and 14. We always do like to point back some of the favorable history, how in FY11 our budget went down by $582,000. Similarly, our draw from the state education fund decreased that year too. In FY12, the budget went up $175,000, which for school budgets of our size is not a tremendous increase, was less than 1%, and our need for funding from the state education fund decreased for the second time that year. You can see the effects on taxes. FY13, we did have that total budget increase of 5.5% does include the voter-approved capital reserve.
Right.
That also included money to repair the Founders School roof. So that year we did have an increase in funding needed from the state education fund. Still, our increase need was lower than the state average that year. FY14, going compared to the FY13 budget, which did include a reserve contribution also, the budget went up 2.1%. We did have a greater need in revenue from the state education fund that year, $641,000. After a number of years of tax decreases or minimal increases, last year with the inclusion of the reserve, the total tax rate increase for Essex approved by the voters was 5.4%. When blended with the high school, which had a more favorable revenue picture, the blended rate was actually a bit lower. So now on to the projected
Can I
budget.
ask a
Yes?
question? So, one line that I'm interested in, and maybe you can help me give me some language of how I might explain this to somebody, but it seems to me that the spending per equalized pupil, the change from prior year, that's a very small shift year to year. And to me, that indicates, I think what it indicates is that we're doing a really good job in managing costs per pupil over time. So even though the budget, goes up and down or whatever, that by holding that line relatively flat, is that a positive indicator for us in terms of management of our budget?
It is a positive indicator. Actually, as you're asking this question, it leads me to think that maybe in our next presentation of this, I would add one line. Basically, the spending per equalized pupil is the state education fund revenue line divided by our number of equalized pupils.
Yeah.
So as the number of equalized pupils changes each year, that can have a positive or negative effect. For example, in FY14, we needed $641,000 more from the state education fund, but we had an increase in equalized pupils too, so that helped
Right.
mitigate an increase in the
Right.
cost per equalized pupil. But ultimately, that is a factor in which school districts are compared across Vermont.
Right.
It was also a factor in the past regarding the whether or not 2 votes were required on our budget. So it is an important factor, but it's part of the. So yes, we'll certainly agree that it's
Right.
positive that we've managed the budget correctly. We don't generally have a great deal of control over the
Right.
the equalized pupils, with I think one exception that Mark alluded to earlier, and again to point the pointer at Jessica again, that with our increased allocations for pre-K students,
Right.
that's increasing our equalized pupil count,
Okay.
which has a positive effect on the tax rate
Right.
for all grades. This next slide now compares the budget for our current year, FY14, with the rollover budget. The rollover budget is $21,035,785, an increase, as you already saw on the cost driver slide, of $720,000. A budget-to-budget increase of 3.5% at this time. In terms of state education fund revenue, our need for revenue would be greater next year from the state than it is this year, basically in making a comparison to the current year local revenue, interest earnings, and miscellaneous local income fund balance, state and federal reimbursements or grants are all projected to be down compared to this year. Actually, in most cases, I budgeted what we actually received this year, which was less than we had budgeted. So when those sources of revenue decrease, the offset then is to ask or require more from the state education fund.
And I think that's going to be an important talking point as we go forward, that as you'll hear tonight through 2.3 monitoring report, that the big story in town is the revenue story. It's the smaller carry forward, and it's federal sequestration, it's grants being tightened up in a number of ways, so that's having an effect.
If we have a budget meeting on December 16th, hopefully on, I guess it'll be
Friday the 13th.
Yeah, Friday the 13th, and I say
I'm with
hopefully.
you. I'll hang out with you.
Yeah. Hopefully on Friday the 13th, we'll get the information that the state normally promises by December 15th, and they always meet that deadline, but it might not come until that Monday. Still, I'm so very talented that I have no problem in bringing you budget information by that evening, but you won't see it in advance. You won't see it the week before, but
Get some
seri-
suspense.
Holiday
seriously,
surprise.
I know that your eyes would have already gone down to the projected tax increase lines. Budget presentations without some projection of tax are you know, that everybody's waiting to hear that. So we try to provide some projection, but again, I would remind you that our estimates of, or the numbers that we will ultimately budget coming from the state, we won't know the amount of reimbursement that we will receive or project to be received for special education until December 15th. Block grants for special ed, we don't get that information till that time. Equalized pupil counts, we do get a preliminary equalized pupil count on December 6th, but that isn't finalized till December 15th. Again, maybe December 13th. Early education grant money, that isn't known. Typically that comes on December 11th. Transportation aid, the reimbursement that we'll get for our transportation expenses last year, that number isn't known until December. The state tax commissioner opines on what the tax rate should be early in December, but it's not early in December yet. And lastly, the common level of appraisal, how the state currently ranks property value in this district compared to others in the state. That has quite an impact on taxes, and that's not known until December.
What is our current common level of appraisal percentage?
That's a good question. I think I'll say 101.69, but I know that it's not exactly
Not
that.
exactly that. We won't hold you to it.
It's close to 100% then.
Yes. Yeah, it
Okay,
is.
thank you.
Those kind of questions, I always appreciate a call before the meeting that I'm going to ask you a real specific
I
thing.
didn't know you were going to talk about it.
I've noted it. Thanks for the question.
So
That's
Roger,
all, Roger.
this scenario does not include any addition to the capital reserve.
Actually, that was one thing that I neglected to mention earlier. It does include, for purposes of discussion,
Okay.
an additional allotment to the capital reserve. Actually, next year, our debt service is going down by $50,000. So, for purposes of discussion, I did include not only the another 75,000 to the capital reserve, but also added another 50,000 to it. So that 125,000, so that debt and capital reserve would remain equal in the new budget.
To carry, it's just
Yeah.
rolled over.
Right.
Okay.
So, but obviously that's the board's call, so. Other than that, the rollover does reflect known expenses and
Right.
carrying the new year forward.
Do you see any reason why the board couldn't consider, or the district, couldn't consider tapping the capital reserve to help offset the cost of technology investments?
I do. The reserve that the voters approved did not include a provision for technology. So
Even though technology is a capital investment?
Mhm. Yep, we made it facilities related. So,
Is there a common like depreciation schedule that gives you a capital investment versus a, just buildings and grounds line item? I don't think we put a definition on that in our language for the capital reserve fund, but in general accounting practice, is there a depreciation timeframe that
yes.
would be considered a capital
Our
investment?
auditors do track depreciation of buildings and so forth, but that has not been a factor in our reserve.
Well, I
It's-
was just thinking about it with respect to the notion of investment in technology, which
Right.
probably depreciates, too quickly to
Right.
to have a capital component to it. And just thinking about it, I also was looking through when we get to the monitoring document. It made me think all of those were sort of buildings and grounds related, but some of them, like tile replacement, I could see where somebody might argue maybe we have an ongoing line item for something like that. So that is more reflection on the other report, but in response to your question, I could see, aside from us not having the language for technology, why maybe that really isn't a long enough term investment
Right.
to be a capital investment.
And the rollover costs as presented don't include special projects that may be funded through the capital reserve.
No, it does not.
So it's pure operating.
Yep.
Okay.
Basically, the only change in the operation and maintenance budget was the revision in utilities. Our property and casualty insurance is also located in that series of the budget, and actually that allocation is going down next year. Insurance came in at a more favorable rate this year than originally forecast, and that should continue into next year. And so other than those two categories, operation and maintenance is held constant with the exception of any personnel costs.
And I think I ask you this question every year. So based on the information that is not yet known, are any of those variables besides the base tax rate, do any of those other variables have the potential to dramatically alter that 5.4%?
Yes, actually, the list that I went through, they will all
Yep.
impact that. I have already altered one. I've made the guesstimate that our equalized pupil count would increase by at least 10 pupils, and that had the positive effect of lowering the tax rate by 0.6%. Every 10 additional equalized pupils will affect the tax rate, or additional 10 additional equalized pupils would lower the tax rate 0.6%. So I did factor that in. Everything else I left the same. The only one revenue change that I did make is because our special education service plan for next year was somewhat less than what the service plan was for the current year. I did assume a slight decrease in special ed reimbursement.
Okay.
But other than that, all the other factors are constant. So this is a very preliminary work. But
Right.
Mark had shared earlier that the state has indicated that most likely there will be a 5-cent increase in the state tax rate. This past year there was a 4-cent increase, but there was also an increase in the base funding per pupil that increased enough that it really equaled about a 2-cent tax increase without a change in the base funding per pupil. Next year, the early data from the New England Economic Partnership, forecasting agency that the state uses for determining the effect of inflation and economics on the base funding per pupil. That base funding, by the way, is statutorily determined based on the latest NECAP or NEAP information, that base funding per pupil will actually decrease a little bit next year.
Go figure.
I
I don't get
So
that. But
The
That should definitely be helpful, especially in the advent of all these new mandated things that we must do.
the legislature
Less.
ultimately
wisdom.
determines that. In a couple previous years, the legislature did not let that base funding per pupil increase as much as inflation would have dictated. Last year they did catch it up and did allow a full increase, of $428, and now for the coming year, the early projection from the AOE is that it would decrease by $42. So we would feel the full effect of a 5-cent tax increase if that occurs, and thus the difference between 5.4% versus 11.5.
Am I correct in assuming that your rollover budget, 21 million, does include certain enhancement to the building and grounds, same as we always put in? Outside of the special above and beyond, like the roof replacement and stuff. But you always have miscellaneous projects around the school that have to be done.
Yeah, the lines for each of those, electrical repairs, plumbing repairs,
And the list goes
special
on.
projects is all, has been held the same, yes.
Yep.
And we meet with all principals. Roger met with principals last month to get the list of things that need to be addressed through that part of the budget.
And actually, for example, the list of things that resulted from those discussions could well require more money than is currently budgeted, but again, for rollover apples to apples, I didn't change any of that.
Okay.
Well, let's move to the last, we have two more slides. One is revenue, and then I'll close her up.
Yes. So I've already alluded a bit to revenue. As you can see, local revenue is down in the coming year. The two biggest changes there are interest rates. Our interest rates, in FY13, we received about $27,000 less in interest earnings than we had budgeted. So I've reflected that going forward in the new year. Another big change in local revenue is our E-rate reimbursement for technology expenses. But because we've had some savings in the expense side of E-rate reimbursable items, the E-rate revenue goes down also. Fund balance, you've heard already with the audit materials that you've received that our fund balance funds remaining from the FY13 budget is $132,275. That isn't drastically different than the basic fund balance that supported this FY14 budget, but the one other difference was the Founder's Roof savings, additional fund balance that we budgeted for FY14 that aren't present in FY15. So in total, fund balance is down, if you had those two numbers together, about $104,000. State revenue, special ed reimbursements, and transportation projected to be down about $67,000. Stay tuned until mid-December on that. And then our federal grants, both the IDEA funds and Title I and II, that decrease of $42,000 is, we've already felt that decrease this year. What I budgeted or assumed to be the revenue for next year is what we're actually receiving this year. What we're actually receiving this year is $42,000 less than we thought we would receive a year ago. So in total, all of those items above the subtotal line equal a revenue loss of $243,000, and that it has to be offset by an increase from the state education fund. To remind you again, the state education fund, about 60% of that comes from our local taxpayers and the rest from the other state sources.
So Roger, does that federal grants line, is that where we see the impact of sequestration?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Any questions on that?
Just the assumption of the 10 additional students, is that related to pre-K students, or is it demographic?
No,
Okay.
I'm certain that we're going to have an increase, so to
Okay.
make the
A number
the
that
presentation
equaled something, okay.
a little more positive. I wanted to
10
increase.
pre-Ks really only equal 5.
That's what I,
Yeah.
that's actually why my question, because I
Or it
thought
might be
that
4.2.
increase in that line item of 20,000 probably represented 10 kids, and I was thinking, I remember that pre-K kids are half
Mhm.
of
I think it's
a
about
student.
half, maybe a little
Yeah.
less than that. 80
La-
Yeah.
Last year, our total equalized pupils pre-K to 8 grew by about 10 students, so that helped
Reasonable.
inform
Okay.
my.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Roger.
yeah.
We'll talk more about this in the coming weeks, but I wanted to highlight again, when we think about investments in the future, some of these may not come to fruition just because they might be cost prohibitive. But I wanted to highlight what I see as being the priorities, if not next year, then certainly in the next couple of years to be thinking about. As I mentioned to the board a couple of weeks ago, when I made the recommendations to eliminate the assistant principal positions, with that went support and services to augment what the principal does in his or her job in the schoolhouse every day. And I really believe, from my view, that that's been an effective change in both EMS and FMS through the redeployment of existing resources they had in the building. It's been more problematic at the elementary school, not for a lack of commitment and hard work on the part of the current principal, but it is developmentally a different place to learn when you have 400 and so 5 to 7-year-olds. Well, I should throw preschool in there as well, and moms and dads and grandparents who are supporting their kids at that age. There's a level of support unequal to what exists in the other buildings. So there are a number of systems in all of our buildings, and so one of the position that I'm thinking about is someone who, not an administrator, not a licensed administrator, but perhaps a teacher who aspires to be a school leader at some point, who has a monitoring responsibility of the different systems in the building. Systems can include a number of different things. It could include the basic systems that we know of called child nutrition programs or custodial staff, the support of paraprofessionals in their roles. But in addition to that, and even more important, I think, are the different systems we have in place in terms of the work that's happening in the building around PLCs, educational support teams through multi-tiered systems of support. We have lots of different teachers that meet throughout the week and throughout the day at different grade levels, and having someone who could support the principal in monitoring those types of systems as well as sort of the nuts and bolts around buses, boilers, and bathrooms. Really important, and having spent, I had one of the best days I've had in a long time, having a chance to spend the whole day at the elementary school today as a wannabe principal. Only kidding. Been there, done that. But it was a lot of fun. And not only was it fun and reinforcing to be there, but it allowed me to see EES in a different light. It's one thing to go there for an hour and have lunch with kids and go to a meeting, but to be there for 8 hours, it really gave me sort of a bigger view of some of those systems that are very, very important and quite frankly difficult to manage given the lack of resources sometimes that exist. One of the things that I know that the school is always going to be challenged by are young children who don't have self-control. And when you have a child who doesn't have self-control, all hands have to be out on deck. And sometimes there's no one out there except for the principal to provide that level of support. So another position that would be sort of the hands on deck, but more importantly could organize and coordinate the different types of human resources that we have available at the building level, which I think we're adequately staffed, I think, in many ways with kids, but we need someone to help support, along with the principal, the coordination of those types of services. So I didn't want to talk about it a lot tonight, but it is a position that I really think would be at some point valuable to add to that faculty. Extended learning opportunities, that's AKA when we look at our regression data, we know that some kids just need to be worked with for longer periods of time, and so we have summer services, and we're having some initial some preliminary conversations about the efficacy of those summer services and what in addition can we be doing to help kids who are most tangled up. I've had some conversations with outside providers, organizations that do after-school programming in addition to the YMCA that have shown some really great results in other school districts in our region. And there's an educational component with some of the organizations I've been speaking to. And so in addition to the fun stuff that we do after school, for example, can we be more strategic in a component of those after-school programs that actually are about teaching and learning, and something I'm exploring more, and it may or may not have cost implications, but it's really want to talk more about and plan for how do we give kids more opportunities for learning in the district. Technology integration, that was my opening comment this evening. I think funding is going to be something we have to talk about. It's hard to keep up when we're putting the same amount of resources into a line that grows exponentially, given the tools that we're affording children, students, and flatlining or bringing the same amount of money every year may not be sufficient. So we've got to think about that in the future in terms of what does that mean for everything from infrastructure to the equipment that we have for kids and the training that staff need. These are already in the budget for FY15, but again, they remain a priority for us. What Ellen and I and others have talked about is the curriculum is one thing, but at some point we have to change program. Investigations and number data space is not a curriculum. It's a program that's standards-based that gets at the content standards in the curriculum. We may need to invest in those programs. We will need to invest in those programs. We made a strategic decision not to bring that in to FY15, but minimally we're looking at for a new math program probably in the neighborhood of $30,000 plus for a new program. So something that
would only do a few grades.
That's only a few grades. So we have to be strategic.
To be strategic on which grades we want to have.
Yeah, yeah. So only bring it up because this is a really important thing right here, and it's not just the alignment of teachers doing good writing, but it's also materials, not unlike technology, that teachers need access to meet these new standards. David?
When you say 30,000 to bring math curriculum,
to a certain grade level, yeah, grade levels.
That isn't necessarily K-8 then, that is a very limited segment of it?
Yeah, I haven't looked at, Ellen is starting to do that research, but I understand that wouldn't do it for all 9 grades in the district.
When we bought investigations, it was over $8,000 at grade level.
So
might be the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Then.
So it wouldn't be prudent to go out and buy that now because the Common Core is just starting to be launched, and we want to make sure when we make that decision, it's a thoughtful one. PD will continue to be a need. You saw the figure of $68,000 or so that seems to be the number going into this year. But again, I think we're feeling very good about where we are as educators and what we're doing in our practice. But this alignment will challenge us to think differently in some cases about what PD looks like in the future. Tier 2 services, 85% of our kids are successful in the classroom. The next tier up of about 10 to 15% of those kids are kids who need something in addition to that work. There isn't a line item in the budget, but in working with Jessica and her teams, this is an important thing that we need to continue to talk about. Most of our services to children is through the special ed gate, and yet there are a lot of kids who are on plans but are not special ed eligible. So what does that mean for service? Are there other services that we may be thinking about in the future? And finally, this is, this notion of are our buildings currently designed in such a way that it maximizes learning for all kids. So this K-5 conversation is floating around a little bit out there. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, at some point do we want to dedicate money to bring people in to help us think about what a K-5 building or pre-K-5 building might look like. 2 of those, in fact. Again, it might be pie in the sky at this point, but I want to make sure we keep that on the board's radar in terms of what types of buildings we need to really meet the needs of all kids. Again, having spent, David, his historical perspective is really, really interesting because that school at EES was designed for over 500 kids. And holy mackerel, we couldn't stick one more kid in there if we tried. I mean, having been in a cafeteria today with 152 6-year-olds, that's a lot of kids. It's a lot of kids, and you can easily say, we'll just create another lunch period. But when you create another lunch period, it just creates that much more of a challenge. So I think it's something that we may, if not this year, I know we've been talking about it, but might want to think about throwing some resources at some point. Okay?
Great.
Any questions on that? I know it's a quick drive-by, but you'll hear more about that on the 9th of December, these ideas.
I think one thing that's important for us to keep in mind, I appreciate you can bring this, you're going to bring it again, you're going to bring it again, you're going to bring it again, and I know we have this conversation every year, and then we present our budget to the public. And we have to remember that the public hasn't seen this over and over. So I just, something I know I'm saying to myself, I need to remember that not everybody gets to have this presentation.
Right.
So thank you for presenting it. It's good.
RITN.
That's right. Everybody has the opportunity. That's true.
And I want to go on record, and I've said it before, you've done such an incredible job supporting, our vision and moving forward, and it would be great to continue to invest, but there's also, there's a point where we have to say you have to make it work with what you have, and I'm a pragmatist in that way. I mean, I know that, but thanks, Dan, because I want to make sure you're constantly hearing that there's always thinking in the back room about, other ways differently that we can do things.
Well, and I think that, we often see the results of our collective work with the passage of the budget. And I think in recent years, we have seen a really healthy and strong endorsement of our work by the fact that our budgets over the last 2 years at least, maybe 3, have passed by a wide margin. And I think that's, to me, an indicator that the community appreciates the work that's been done and also is willing to invest in education. So I think that's a good thing to remember, too, is that our community has been very supportive of the work that we've done.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
And it could be that you'll just share more if we get to this with the EES system support next iteration or so.
Yes.
Just so that I can understand how it's different or the same from Founders, where we have, and I'm not even sure what the position's called, but Scott Edwards that
behavioral interventionist
sits
positions.
near the principal's office, and I don't know if there's a similar coordinating type person there. Are the structures currently similar among the 3 buildings in terms of the resources and how they're deployed and used?
There's one full-time equivalent in each school, and I think what they try to prevent and respond to is going to look different based on the circumstances, based on the age of the children. For instance, the little bit of data I shared around in a monitoring report, Dan at the elementary school will field twice as many referrals in a day than Scott might or Chris might at the middle school.
It's really around developmental differences, and because we probably have similar bodies in each building, number of bodies in each building.
So I think it's understanding the root of the difference between EES, FMS, and EMS. And it sounds like mostly it's around that developmental, behavioral issue that is different for that particular age group than it is for.
Right. And one of the things that we've observed, and again, please know that this is not reflective of the commitment that our current principal at the EES has towards all kids learning. It really isn't. But so we have a number of types of meetings that happen during the day, and one of them is called a professional learning community meeting, where teachers get together and they look at student work and they think about what I need to do differently next week. And what we ask Joyce and Kevin and Peter to do is to be highly visible during those times when teachers are doing that work. Some is to support the person who's facilitating the meeting. Others is to is actually look hands-on to the data that's happening. But if something goes bump, that principal can't be there. And so if a team was hoping that principal would be there to help them get through a particular tough spot, if something goes bump, the principal has to go deal with what just went bump.
Right.
So that position, if you will, might be a position that helps to continue those meetings going regardless if the principal is there or not, because it would be an educator who would have the background knowledge, who might even actually be a teacher who can help to support that work, so we don't miss a beat ever with those types of meetings, because the monitoring of student performance is just, it's so critical, and sometimes principals can't be there to make sure that happens as best it could.
And is that and again, it might just be developmentally appropriate, but is that the sort of division of labor that happens? I'm not even sure it'd be fair to compare it to the middle school, but more here. Would the principal respond to that, or the behavior interventionist respond to that? Would the principal be in the PLC meetings here, or not? Would the principal be in the PLC meetings in the middle school? And I'm not trying to suggest I would have any different way of offering the use of those resources, but trying to understand a principal's role in responding to a behavioral bump if they're more important than that.
I'll put together
PLC.
some information for you that might be helpful. We have, again, I got to meet a couple of kids today. Great kids who just, weren't making good decisions, and I was the guy, because there's just, So I think the developmental needs of children is part of the thing that was what we're experiencing here to a degree.
So I don't want to cut off the conversation, but we have 5 minutes left in this agenda item and 2 more items to cover. So we've spent an hour on the rollover budget, which was very good. So thank you for the information.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Roger, as well. And we do need to move on to the monitoring report around 2.3. And then also within the same section, we have 2.8, which is an update on lunch and recess in the elementary school. So let's get right into the monitoring report.
So I sent to you I think it was red.
Yes, it was red, yeah.
Mine didn't come out in red. I'm not sure why, but and I wanted to highlight 3 things which I'm sure you as well gleaned from some overarching themes that came out in the report. The first, and again, just proud to report that the audit conducted by Forthgill Seagull and Valley CPAs determined that, in fact, when you look at this policy, we did not expend more money than we had revenue for. So that's a good thing.
It's always a good sign.
You can put that in my evaluation. So that's a good thing. And the summary of that is discussed in a brief sort of way. Roger pointed out today or tonight that we had about a little over 1% money that we didn't spend last year, but it was eaten up a little bit because of we had some revenue shortfall, so our carry forward was lower. But the management letter and the audit that you have was mailed to you, I believe, right? Yep. Again, once again, identifies that our books look good, type of thing, and that's an important theme, I think, always to announce. The other big theme, and again, that we've talked about, is that we do have we had a revenue shortfall and less fund balance this year. And since I've been here, and when I came in 2010, we've really enjoyed a robust fund balance, which has been carried forward, which has helped us, maintain reasonable increases in tax rates. And that's another big part of the report. I think that's noteworthy. That things have shifted a little bit in that regard.
Right.
The long-term reserve is the third item, which I think you might find interesting, that was on in the report, that shows how those monies were spent, dedicated to these building projects at the district level, and that we wanted to make sure, that we alerted the board on what the current reality was. To me, I think those were the major items that were noteworthy, and I guess at this point, Roger and I would take any questions from the board.
So are there any questions around either the interpretation or the evidence that Mark has presented in this monitoring report?
This is very clear, my opinion.
Yep. Kim, any questions?
Again, and I don't know that it's to either of those points specifically, but in seeing our expenditures under the long-term and a reserve account, and thinking about it from a capital investment standpoint, so the investment having sort of a long-term horizon on it, I just didn't really have a sense of hallway, and I know this isn't the first time we're seeing it because it was part of what we had
Right.
approved prior, but hallway wallpaper removal, and I didn't know, and it sounds as though we do have a line item that covers sort of these rolling type of smaller projects. It doesn't sound like a big capital investment, to be honest. Aside from the fact putting 10,000 in a budget anywhere these days is a challenge. But in terms of its long-term investment in the building, I'm just a little curious around something like that sort of popped up to me as not feeling like a big capital investment.
Yeah.
Where sidewalk, I think, has a longer horizon, even the floor tile installation to do all buildings at once.
You know what might be helpful in addressing your question and questions in the future? It might be to understand what the criteria or criterion that you use to determine whether or not something is funded through the capital fund, because it is a maintenance and capital improvement. I think we use the word maintenance in somewhere in the language around the so I think that would be good for us to know, maybe just as a regular reminder, is here's how we decide what goes in, what we use this money for, and that might help address this particular question, but then questions going forward.
Yep. Yep.
So
I mean, part of it is the impact financially. I mean, that it sounds like it's not a very, it's kind of a boring project, replacing wallpaper, but it was expensive, and so our line, David, our rolling line is not. There's not a lot of money in that. So either we put it in the general budget to get it done, or this seemed like a one-time opportunity to.
And
to
it
take
doesn't
care
come
of
up
it.
again for a while.
That's right.
Correct.
And actually, I'd add to that, originally when we talked about projects last year during budget development time that we were, that we presented to you to fund through the capital reserve, we thought that more carpet would be removed at the elementary and replaced by tile, and then as it turned out, the wish was to not do as much as that, so that was one of the reasons that we then substituted the savings on that to remove this wallpaper, which had been a long-standing concern with the principals.
But we'll get clearer about that with you.
I just think it would be a good practice to remind us on a regular basis, once a year, or whenever the right time is, to say, and let's not forget, this is how we decide what this bucket funds.
Yeah.
And I think helping our community understand that it is truly a capital improvement and facilities investment type fund that we're asking for their support on, and that it's not money we moved out of an operating budget line item.
Right.
It's not a shell game. This is really stuff we couldn't accomplish in a single budget cycle on our operating budget, and I think that's a critical difference in how we would choose to utilize that. Certainly securities updates, the not so exciting conveyor belt dishwasher system thing.
But I mean, you make a good
important.
point.
It's an investment, and it's got a depreciation schedule.
Part of telling the story about the budget each year is for us to be able to refer back to some of the things that the capital and reserve maintenance fund has made possible. So to be able to point to some of those things and say, without that support, we wouldn't have been able to do these critically important projects, dishwasher or not. I mean, so I think that our ability to be able to refer to those specific projects helps us to tell the story about the budget. So that's why that list is critical. Not that we approve those individual projects, but that it helps us explain how that fund is being used. Any other questions or comments? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll move that we approve monitoring report of policy 2.3 as presented.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Abstentions? Opposed? Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
And if you have specific feedback, I see some of you filling out the worksheet as we go. Please forward it to me, and I will collect it, collate it, and provide it to Mark. If you have specific feedback about the language of the presentation, suggestions for future presentations. So, great. So the next item in this particular section is an update on EES lunch and recess monitoring.
So in keeping with what I think we agreed to whenever you're approached as board members by parents who have concerns, and I'm notified that I have responsibility to bring back to you in an open meeting a status report on what I have come to understand about the issue. So I think we understand what the issue is, that we've got 152 first graders who are in the cafeteria together, because that's where the schedule has them, and as a result, there's been some student management concerns. All great kids, but there's just a lot of them, and sometimes it bubbles up and it creates some behavioral issues. And the principal elected a couple of weeks ago to use time before recess to address the group as a whole. It probably wasn't the best decision to make, although you got to make decisions as a principal when things are happening. And it was perceived by some parents that it was a part of an overall discipline philosophy that from the school, that we take recess away when kids are not behaving, when in fact that was not the intent of the principal. But I think he fully recognizes his responsibility, having not communicated that ahead of time, that's a likely perception that's going to be held by some parents. So fast forward to last Wednesday night, I was invited to attend a meeting. It was great to visit with 30 parents who were really interested in hearing more about that decision. And we listened for a good 45 minutes or so, and it was important to hear what people's concerns were. And at the end of that hour or so, I think it was 2 hours actually, I think it was pretty close to 2 hours.
I wasn't able to make it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 hours.
And it was a good full 2 hours. There wasn't any downtime. But three big targets came out of that. One is the administration needs to be more communicative with the parent organization, the parent group, when there are things that are bumping during the day, and it's creating a shift in practice, like not going to recess, then let us know as parents, because we want to be there to help you. So you've got to be more communicative when there are subsystems things that we're concerned about. The second issue that came out of that, or idea, was that our line staff, those people who are supporting kids in the cafeteria, need more support and training. With that many children and things moving pretty quickly, not all staff always have the right stuff in their toolbox, if you will. So the principal also heard loud and clear that that there needs to be a greater sort of strategic way of providing support, real-time, day-to-day sort of support to class sizes, or to situations like this when we have lots of kids in one space. And finally is the role of classroom teachers. That because we have a responsive classroom model at the elementary school, one of the main tenets of that is to make sure that we're good citizens throughout our school day, not just when I'm on my bottom in my first grade classroom in front of the teacher, but the skills that we learn, the predispositions, the habits of mind, the attributes we're trying to reinforce in kids, we need to hold them accountable throughout their day. So if kids are not following that way of behaving in other parts of the day, teachers need to know about that. And it needs to be addressed, not as disciplinarians, but let's talk about what happened at lunch today. Let's talk about what happened at recess today. Maybe we should let mom and dad know the types of decisions that you're making. And so the teacher, along with the principal, if appropriate, has that communication with parents if they need to be told about it. So it's the communication in the general sense. It's making sure that we've got the resources to support kids real time when they're there. And thirdly is being more inclusive with educators and helping to support the good work that we're trying to do across the school day. So an action plan hasn't been developed. A number of the big idea thoughts have been written down, and Peter's commitment is to have a plan in place, if you will, by the end of this week. And I'm confident that he will accomplish that.
And so is part of that plan to communicate at least back to those parents who attended, here's what the plan is?
Actually to the whole to first grade parents in
Okay.
general,
Yeah.
and
And that was a request that a lot of people said was so many didn't hear about the meeting till after the
That's
fact.
right,
And
yeah.
they felt that they should be included. And, you know, it was only after the meeting that they asked their kids, and their kids are telling them stories. So they would love to hear
they will.
that.
They will, yeah.
Is it just first grade that's an issue? Or I would assume that if this plan is good for first grade, it wouldn't be good for
No,
all
I think
grades
I think
lunch?
it's all grades. I think first grade's more problematic because there's just a lot of kids there. Yeah. But no, I think just in all congregate situations, it can be bus duty, end of the day dismissal, it could be playground. I mean, it's just a lot of children that we have to make sure we've got, eyes on and good interactions and,
Mark,
between adults and kids.
one question that I have that's kind of, and maybe this is just sort of more thinking down the line, is especially with the fact that we have a capital reserve fund, I wonder how much of the problem could be managed, because this is an ongoing issue in terms of the number of kids in that small space. When is it appropriate for some discussion to take place around the idea of renovating that space so that it is more conducive to having a sane lunch period with that many kids in one specific area? I just wonder if there's anything that we can do from a board perspective in relation to the budget to help address what I think is also a space issue.
Yeah, it's a good observation. So our responses on Wednesday was about short term is what we have to do like now.
Right.
And then long term, I did mention that we've got to do we do need to be thinking long term around, it's a 21st century learning environment sort of conversation. Does this space, when you look at the cafeteria, any of our cafeterias, and the way we do lunch, it looks sort of like how we did lunch a number of years ago, maybe even decades ago. So what does a good environment look like conducive to socialization, having nutritious meals, being able to, you can't even walk around in that cafeteria.
Right.
Peter heard loud and clear, and he's in support of having recess before lunch. And there's some mystery around why that didn't happen a number of years ago, but he's committed to making sure that happens in school year 14-15. Unequivocally, it will happen. And I think there's enough conventional wisdom suggests that running around and getting your yayas out before lunch helps you be more focused on your meal and friendships when lunch is happening.
Yep.
But it's not possible to do that now?
It would be, I think it would be too disruptive. I don't know the detail.
I don't know.
But I think you're absolutely right. And they're looking at short term, taking 20 kids out, having lunch on the stage,
Right.
But right now it's like
Lunch with the principal?
The superintendent.
Are they also looking at things within the room itself that could be done to maybe make that a, and
Stacking?
I don't know, I have no idea,
Well,
stacking tiered.
one of the-
But I don't know
Yeah.
if there's other.
Well,
things
there's
they looked
one of
at.
the action steps that wasn't shared with the group, but is to bring someone in from the outside who Peter knows, just to do an environmental scan. For instance, I don't want to get into it because it's late,
Yeah,
but
sure.
when you have 40 kids waiting to go through the lunch line, I mean, it's
Right. That never happens.
yeah. But you have so many kids.
Place.
Right.
And they're little kids. I
Yeah.
mean, they have choices now and food, and it's not. So anyway, there's all of that is definitely
Okay.
worth pursuing. But short term, I think there's some better communication and involvement with teachers and parents is important.
So,
David had a question too.
You were at all three lunch periods today in the cafeteria, from what I understood. Did you see a tremendous difference in the behavior amongst the three groups?
No, I really didn't. I was more active in the first grade lunch.
Because they were more active?
No, it's the way I think you have to do business, sitting down, talking to kids, moving around all the time, tying shoes, opening milk, talking to kids. Love that baloney. Really?
Good for you.
I mean, you have to be really active, and first grade makes you have to be more active.
Okay. Curious.
Yeah. I didn't have 3 lunches. I just had 1 lunch. But I was,
in first grade either, was it?
And then just wait till the
no,
winter
I waited
closes
till
get
2nd
involved.
grade. Much more civil.
so
And the training for lunch staff, I assume, means the paraprofessionals that monitor lunch also lunch person training, or
No, it's just the people
just
who
the
are out in the
paraprofessionals who are
Mhm. Yeah.
managing the staff?
And
Okay.
Jessica and I talked just recently today about, how to provide that, more ongoing opportunities to get better at what you're doing. It's a tough job.
Would instead of or in addition to training, would more staff benefit, or would that just pack another body
Maybe,
into that
Dan.
room?
In my observations, I thought we had enough adults in there today. I walked away with wondering if we could have been doing a little bit differently in terms of how adults were,
Okay.
if you will.
Yeah, that's great.
But I think someone who's responsible for sort of the head person, who happens to be someone who is very gentle, and she's quiet, and so to be able to get your voice up, it's hard.
Yeah.
So we've talked about miking and an ability to have a greater sort of presence with just to be able to, so you're not yelling over kids.
Right.
I think it'd be great if you can have a different system as opposed to just simply throwing more people at it.
Yeah, I don't know if more people's the answer, quite frankly.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, and
Yeah.
if
That's
the,
good.
if there's a collaboration with the classroom teachers and just the culture of responsive classroom and its responsibilities of the students to their community, whether that's the community at lunch or the community in their classroom, if that's happening and paraprofessionals are trained in that sort of language and those reminders, I've seen that be effective in
Right.
different grades, just in sitting in there as a volunteer and watching that be, sometimes kind of magical, bringing kids back to what they agreed
Mhm.
was going to be their job
Yeah.
Right.
in being part of this community and this school.
Yeah.
And
in Responsive Classroom, there's a lot of practicing over the first 3 weeks. This is how you walk down the hall, this is how you take your chair, this is how you hang up your coat. But sometimes we have to practice those things again.
Right.
And even though it's November 18th, you know what? We're going to take the time practicing how to go in and sit down and be good little citizens. And I think it's that. I think it's just sort of recalibrating around some of that.
So, Mark, for those of us who might not have a child in EES, is there a way for us to get whatever Peter's update is?
Sure.
I mean, we
Absolutely.
just might miss the loop.
Yep.
So
Yeah, I think it'd be
Sure.
nice to have that sent to the board agenda.
yeah, just to close that loop. That's great, though. Thank you.
David,
for that update.
do you have a question, David? I saw you. Okay.
Yeah, I'll ask a question. Does the principal of the school have a direct line to Santa Claus before Christmas?
Wishes he did.
Implying that might be the case could be very helpful. All right. Thank you for that update, Mark.
Thank you very much.
So, thanks for helping us get a little bit back on track here. We have 2 more items for tonight's meeting. The first is a monitoring report that Kim has prepared for us around 3.2, accountability of the superintendent. And we're also going to circle back on a community linkage plan that Rachel and I worked on over the last week, and we'll present to you as sort of a framework for an approach that we began talking about last week. So first and foremost, I think Kim had sent out a copy of her monitoring report, and we have a printed copy also in front of us now. So Kim, I'll turn it over to you.
sure. I apologize that you guys didn't get this till this afternoon. And I took a look back at last time around, although I couldn't find 2012, but 2011, and spent some time talking with Mark and looking back at previous monitoring reports, minutes, meeting evaluations, etc., to generate my thoughts on this. I interpret the policy to mean that we are holding the superintendent accountable to the needs of the majority of the board with respect to our policies, outcomes for kids, and executive limitations, that we're evaluating only the superintendent, and that the last component of it is demanding that we evaluate the superintendent based on achievement of those outcomes and with respect to our policies specific. And so as I went through each of these areas, I found us to be largely in substantial compliance across all 3 areas. And maybe not knowing what we don't know, there were 2 years ago we were in complete compliance on everything. So I'm maybe holding us to a higher standard. And you know, again, I think that we are refining ourselves as we go through with this policy governance and monitoring. And I really wanted us to take it from the standpoint of reflecting on how we can do our best practice around these areas. So on the first, it's speaking to the idea the board will never give instruction to persons who report directly or indirectly to the superintendent. The notion that the superintendent is our one employee. And I think that we're in substantial compliance, and we also wear a lot of hats as board members. And so even in our casual interactions, our words and actions have the opportunity to be received differently, even if we're there as a parent. And so helping us to be really disciplined in our practice as a parent or whatever our other hats are, so that our board work is board work that happens here, and that we can remain engaged parents, you know, community members, taxpayers, and all the other hats by having clarity of roles around this. So I just think it's an area that I consider us more in substantial compliance because we wear those multiple hats, and it requires a constant discipline to make sure we're clear. Any thoughts?
Are you saying that we're not?
I think there are times probably where, not even necessarily overtly, but by some of we are the uber-informed parent,
But you don't
per
have
se,
specific examples.
Well, I think we probably serve in a lot of different parent volunteer, chaperone, community member, and there are any number of places where we may inadvertently ended up in a conversation that we come at it from a place of systems thinking as a board person. And so we have the opportunity, because we happen to also run into that person in whatever capacity, whether it's you visiting the elementary school or us chaperoning a dance or attending a Boy Scout thing, and we are the uber-informed parent who may be approached as a board person, who may provide feedback to a principal or a teacher or somebody that we're running into, that will be received, if not specific to our child or whatever our personal situation is, to comment to it from the standpoint of information we have because we're a board member, may feel as though it's an evaluation. So I think I am lacking in specific examples, but I think they probably exist where there are occasions that continues by virtue of the fact that we are human and we serve a lot of roles. I think.
I'll give you an example of how I used to, quite honestly, pick on a principal. And it was a weekly event, to be honest with you.
I bet they loved it.
It happened in this room. And what was happening is, at various board meetings, I couldn't see my paper, so I look up. And the lights weren't working in all cases. And so first thing when I came into this building was to start look around and see how many light bulbs weren't functional. And after a while, that principal started to make sure that all lights are working before a board meeting, which was I evaluating the principal and the system, or was I making suggestions that maybe they should look around and see what needed to be done? But I don't know specifically that I would have been in violation of a policy, because if a school board member notices that a bunch of light bulbs are burned out, I'm sure that anyone else, all of the parents that were always coming to our meetings, also noticed and were questioning what's really going on in this building.
You know, David, you bring up a great point, and I think that I've experienced something like that, and again, I think it's partly it's human nature. So I might come to a parent-teacher conference, for example. Not that this happened this year or anything, but and I might be coming into that meeting with my parent hat firmly on, but that teacher is clearly saying things to me as a board member, you know, and that it's just, I think it's just sort of their natural, you know, inclination, because they also know that I wear that other hat, even though I'm there with a particular hat on that day. And so I think that's partly our challenge, is that even though we might try as best we can to navigate the delicate balance between what role am I playing today, people think of us sometimes first as a board member, and I think that can be challenging and difficult for us to sometimes interpret why am I being given this information? Why am I being asked this question? And then after some reflection, you're like, oh, it's because I'm a board member. And so I think that's it's kind of the flip of that, is that sometimes we can't control how people respond or interact with us because they know that we're a board member, and sometimes that puts us in a difficult position.
And I think I'm actually realizing that we don't have it up there, so I think I read what the policy was, but my words to it were, I consider our board to be in substantial compliance, so the board is mindful to avoid overt directions to district employees other than the superintendent. Board members must also be aware that we each wear multiple hats as board members, parents, spouses, community members, taxpayers, etc. And as such, we must be careful to keep board business and suggestions for staff at the board table. Such clarity of roles will allow board members to continue to be involved, engaged community members, parents, etc., while also being effective in our governance role. As the multiple hats requirements of this job remains one of our greatest challenges, we must continue to exercise discipline in this regard. So I think we do largely a good job. I think the times that we don't, for whatever reason, again, maybe because we're the uber-informed parent and we have the opportunity because we cross paths with somebody,
Right.
Our clarity of roles lets us continue to be an involved parent and have a voice on behalf of our children if we keep things as clear as we can, as often as we can,
Right.
So that our board work and suggestions are happening in a way that makes sense for our system, and that, we can still have that voice. I think we can. It just requires our discipline, because we have so many hats to wear.
One thing that I often do when I'm thinking of an email I sent to Megan Botosh recently for choir, Lauren's in choir, and I try to acknowledge the fact that there is that dual role. And I say, Megan, as a board member, I want to say thank you for all the great work you do with our students. And now, as a parent, when is that next practice? Whatever,
Right.
whatever the comment is. And I try to acknowledge that to, yeah, I know this is weird,
Yeah.
but let's get to the
And
table.
I
Okay,
think-
now let's move on. Not
Yeah.
talking as a
I
parent.
think educators do their best too not to put us in those compromising
Yeah.
situations, and while we're being disciplined to it, they can also respect that and know that, that's, we're all challenged maybe by that. But I think the better we do at that, the more effective we can be when we're sitting here, and the more effective and engaged we can remain as either parents or grandparents or community members or whatever other roles and hats we wear. It's just being really cautious.
Right. I just think another
Aware.
anecdote might be helpful. I mean, was it last year or 2 years ago? Not only was I serving as a board member, but with David, I was serving as part of the negotiating team from the board, and meeting with one of the members of the union team was my child's teacher. And so, luckily we had a great sort of back and forth, and whenever we sat down to talk about student-related matters, we were very clear about, this is what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about my child's, ability to do her best in your classroom. And that was really good to acknowledge, that this could be awkward, but it's not awkward because today I'm here to talk to you about as a parent. And so that sometimes just sort of laying it out there is very helpful as you negotiate kind of some of these pathways.
Navigating.
It's not just the teachers, it's the other parents. And I find it's very challenging sometimes, being in all the schools, past PTO president.
Right.
It's amazing how many times.
Right.
I try really hard to direct, but it's its own challenge. To me, that's been far more challenging. Oh.
And
I
I
can
think it
appreciate
appears
it.
in a few of our
challenging.
policies,
It's all
but
challenging.
I felt as
It's-
though
That's
this
why
particular
when
area
I
of
looked
this
at that, I almost
policy-
said, I would almost say partial, but
I know.
just.
I felt really badly
Because it's
dropping us from
hard.
fully compliant to partially
It's just-
compliant.
it's-
I think it's one of our biggest challenges. I think
It's
we
hard.
do our best around it, and I think it's important to remind us that continues to be a challenge, and we just have to be disciplined and aware.
When I read this, I had the feeling that the board could never be in compliance unless all 5 board members did not have kids in the school, did not have grandkids in the school, did not have relatives working with the school, and rendered so that they specifically didn't directly pay taxes.
So if we're all from Waterbury, maybe.
We'd be perfectly in compliance.
No.
I-
And if
I
all
don't
that's,
know, but-
if we met all that criteria, maybe we'd be in 100% compliance, but that's the only way that we could be.
Well, I
Maybe
think,
it's okay, as long as, I think it's okay when Mark comes to us with monitoring reports where he's acknowledging non-compliance when he is sharing with us the plan to come into compliance. And so if we were to remain substantially compliant in this area and we remain vigilant to this multiple roles discipline so that we can be effective in all of our roles, I'm okay with us staying, substantially compliant, more so than saying we're compliant and not acknowledging the challenges that present themselves in this particular category. Because whatever we may pass as judgment may feel like evaluation to somebody other than our sole employee being Mark. And that is, so in the light bulb example, David, in this version of our governance, you probably, whether or not it would be joking with the principal, we definitely expect that Mark would probably be talking to, Roger or somebody and saying, seriously, what's up with the lights? I think we're good with the lights, but it just might go a little bit differently.
I'm also going to say that in part, being what I was, without putting adjectives to it, overall it made a lot of difference in the cosmetics of the district.
Absolutely.
And I have no regrets about the way that I feel that I brought that
And
about.
I'm guessing they enjoyed your banter.
so any other questions or feedback about the monitoring report?
Did we want to hit the rest of them quickly, since it's not up there?
That would be fine, yeah.
The board won't evaluate either formally or informally any staff other than the superintendent. We're not instructing people in the first one, we're not evaluating anybody in the second one, and we're not in the business of evaluating staff other than the superintendent. I considered us substantially compliant. This is another area where we need to be clear on our roles and responsibilities with respect to personnel matters and assure that judgment not be deemed as evaluation. And then in the last one, it's saying that the board will view superintendent performance as identical to organizational performance so that organizational accomplishments of board stated ends and avoidance of board prescribed means will be viewed as successful superintendent performance. I consider our board to be in substantial compliance again here. We conduct an annual performance evaluation for the superintendent, and it reflects an analysis of the previous year's monitoring reports for all the 1.0s and the 2.0s, the ends and the executive limitation policies. But there's also a component of the evaluation that reflects on the less concrete aspects of the job, which may not appear in the policy, and it's not really prescribed in policy governance model, nor specifically in any of our policies. And therefore, technically, I don't think we would be in complete compliance on this in doing that part of the evaluation. And I think if we view it as valuable as a board, which I think we have in the past, we may want to figure out where that would live in policy so that there'd be clear expectations around that for Mark or any, superintendent in policy is being evaluated by something. I'm sure there's value in our sort of intangible analysis of the job done over the past year. Technically in policy governance, there's no place for it.
It's more of that qualitative feedback opportunity.
I think there is, though, in some places, like treatment of staff.
Right.
I mean, if we all decided Mark's a jerk and he's treating our staff poorly, that's where it would land.
For the
we
record.
think Mark is nice. He treats the staff well. That's where it lands. And so I think actually, I think it is there.
Yeah.
Maybe not said in those nice, soft, concrete, non-concrete, is Mark a nice guy? But the way he treats staff, I think, comes across in our monitoring reports.
Bowl, or there might be a policy where we could. I don't really know. It has been a part of our evaluation the last couple of years, at least. It's the way we've done it the last couple of years.
I think what that represents, Kim, and I have to go back and remind myself, but I think what that could represent is sort of highlights of performance that ultimately do tie back to a specific policy, but we've never connected that dot.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Or if it's not been the data that was presented in the 1.0 or the 2.0, but it's a reflection on that, but it's not provided as feedback in real time. It's not part of the monitoring report.
Right.
So in theory, this piece of this policy is saying superintendent's performance is deemed to be exactly identical to performance of the organization as determined by monitoring.
Right, but
And so.
I think the challenge we have is more about timing. So if we
Yep.
monitor a policy at the beginning of the year, but then have feedback and observation about what was covered in that initial policy as we deliver an end-of-year evaluation, we have no opportunity to revisit that throw policy.
Absolutely.
So
No,
I
I
think-
agree. So
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
wondering
that's
if there isn't, if when we do that's why I almost think it may live as another bowl
Right.
under the superintendent evaluation part of our job. And only so that in theory, I believe it to be valuable part of the evaluation. I don't know whether Mark does, but I view it to be a valuable part of the evaluation. So in being disciplined to our model of governance, we
Right.
would probably want to find a place to clearly state that expectation under policy.
Right,
um,
right.
For doing our job, I guess, or for figuring out.
Well, maybe what we do then as an action item, and this could be captured in the minutes, is as we approach the evaluation period for this coming year, maybe we could use that opportunity as sort of, we said we were concerned about this aspect of the policy, so now as we're going into an evaluation period, let's take a hard look at whether or not we need to modify the policy.
Yep. And I referenced that as one of the ways we'd come into compliance. So,
Okay.
I didn't say
Right.
specifically a time certain that we would do it, but I think we probably don't even have to address it. The other thing we haven't been doing as much of, and I think it's a shared responsibility, and Mark and I talked about it, the sort of ahead of the next monitoring report, the part where we touch base on what might be coming with respect to data or evidence and the monitoring reports coming up. And sometimes we had done that last spring, and I think maybe it made it smoother for Mark what we were either looking for or missing in data when he comes to the table with stuff.
Right, so as we
Um,
prepare for a monitoring report,
Yeah.
maybe there's a 10-minute opportunity for people to sort of air either
Yeah.
concerns or questions or pieces of evidence that they might be
Anything that's
interested in
helpful, because
seeing.
we continue to sort of fall down on the job and providing the ongoing feedback to Mark, other than
Right.
at the table while we're having the conversation on feedback after the monitoring documents, or I think appropriately so going back in some ways on big pieces like the 1.0, the entire set of ends policies. Now we know we're probably going to take longer than one meeting, and that's okay. But having as much as you find helpful in that. So maybe that's something for you to sort of lead us if you feel it's helpful, Mark, or not necessarily ours to lead, but if it's beneficial,
Yep.
great. If it's not, fine, but minimally on the back end, like, I made myself do that one today because I had just done this monitoring report. So I was not going to fall down on day one.
I did mine too, just so you know.
But
I
we're
didn't.
bad about that, and
Awesome.
I feel like that actually has shown up. That was in the 2011 one, just for the record. Even though we were in compliance, we weren't doing a great job on that.
Just a thought on that one saying, Mark, here's what we want to see in monitoring report, whatever, 2 whatever. Should that come from the board? Is that something that we need to come together and say, here's what the board wants? Or can Rachel say, hey, Mark, I'd like to see this? And
Yeah.
Well,
Kim
I
say,
kind
"Mark,
of
I
look
wanna
at.
see this."
No.
I guess what I'm thinking is, what if you just take a look at the monitoring report from the year before, see where it is, what information, and then as a board, you just say, was that appropriate or what was missing? I mean, to me, it seems like you need to almost start with what you had last year.
Right.
And I think
go
we
forward.
don't always know what Mark has for evidence, and so maybe it's only around times where there's going to be big changes in the stuff you're doing, or what. Again, I think that's really, if you feel like there's benefit in having a quickie saying, okay, I'm changing interpretation, or I've got new evidence now, this is what I'm intending to share. Are there holes that jump out at you, or something that gives you a heads up with ample time to be responsive? If that's helpful, then.
Are more iterative than.
Some of these other
Not
ones.
that this is pro forma, the executive's limitations, but, I mean, I'm mixing it up a little bit, but there's not a
Right.
lot of
Yep.
text change here.
Right.
Right.
But I think with budget work, because of its dynamic and ends, I think that having those conversations ahead of time. And yes, fill out your form, and not just X's and zeros, but, substantive feedback, and, write some stuff, then I can use that to better inform my thinking the following year.
To answer your specific question, Dan, though, I think it would not be productive for individual board members to request things of Mark You know, so I think,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
so I think
Yeah.
the proper conversation is for, like, let's just use it as an example. If something's coming up, you come to the meeting before and say, I'm thinking that we need this for evidence for, you know, this particular monitoring report. We discuss it as a board, and if we all agree, then we direct, the board then directs Mark.
So that should almost go on the agenda one meeting before.
Right, because I don't want to have Mark sort of guessing, like, okay, well, Dan mentioned this and Kim mentioned that, and so
Right.
what am I
Oh
supposed to
my
present?
Right.
You know?
Yeah, that'd be
Because I think that's the sort of pickle that we've put him in before,
Right.
and I definitely don't want to keep doing that. So I think that's an
There's
important
another
thing.
way to approach it, though, I think. If I was interested in something, I might go to Mark and say, when you do your report, would you consider including such and such? But if you choose not to, that's your decision.
But
Yeah.
according to
That
this
would-
policy, that would be in violation of this policy.
I'm not directing him, I'm making a suggestion.
It's a very
It's
fuzzy
still
line.
his call.
But
It's
because of
still
our
his
multiple
call,
hats.
and I would not penalize him in any way.
Right, but I think that, I think I appreciate your intention, but I think that that could have an unintended consequence of making him feel like, well, even though David said this isn't important, he brought it to my attention, and so if I don't address it, am I going to be, you know?
But it's up to him to figure out if whichever one
But I-
person made that suggestion is gonna bring it back.
But I think what I'm trying to say is that I think that's the board's decision to make. So in other words, you should be taking, instead of giving that suggestion to Mark, you should be coming to the board and saying, I think Mark needs to give us this. And then we discuss it as a board before we make it.
But if I read something like this on Monday afternoon at 4:00,
Yeah.
there's not too many opportunities before
No, there's not before
No.
7.
8:45 to
Yeah,
discuss it
that's
with
But
the
true.
there
board.
is if we're looking
That's
at
true.
monitoring what's coming up the next meeting. So that's, I think, what
Right.
on occasion Mark's done, and we've sort of put a little 2 cents in ahead, but I guess we would need to have consensus of the board that what we're asking for is important. I think that was one of the things I said, that the majority of the board
Yeah.
is directing
Right.
just our superintendent.
Right. And
Because
David's
that'd be a
point-
different policy we'd be violating if we're individually going to him and directing things.
Right, but David's point is a good one, that we have to have, as a board, we have to have the time and the foresight
Yeah.
to have that conversation before.
Yeah, so I think it'd be fairly easy to do. Just look at our work calendar and go, oh, on December 8th. I don't know if that's a Monday, but December 9th.
December 9th.
December 9th, we're going to have this
is
monitoring
what's
report.
coming.
Yeah.
Therefore, you back up one meeting when you do the agenda and say, and here's 5 minutes to talk about what we want to see on the monitoring report that we're going
And
to
I
have on
don't think-
December 9th.
I mean, I didn't necessarily mean that we're gonna instruct Mark on how he brings us our monitoring reports, but I did think that there have been occasions where that's been productive in giving you heads up on, and in all honesty, in a lot of these, we don't know what data even exists to be brought, or
Right.
you might be able to say, I've got a different interpretation on this, and, you don't even have to necessarily tell us how it is, you might give us a quickie, I'm coming at it from this angle, and so some of the evidence is gonna look a little different, and
Right, and I think it sort of falls, if we're gonna have that sort of casual of a conversation about expectations, I think it falls to you as well to say, okay, now wait, is this some just helpful feedback that you're giving me, or are you asking me for a specific
Yeah.
thing? So I think,
That's my point, right?
yeah, so I think he needs to be able to ask us that question as
At
we're,
his own
as we're having a conversation about what might be helpful.
Yeah, and then we also are all hearing it all together
Right.
with Mark, and, we can say, okay, yeah, 4 of the 5 of us, or 5 of us really feel like that will illuminate the situation for us, and
Right.
then you don't find it out on the Monday, you're presenting it to us as a whole, and being able to, it was really more for the purpose of
Yep.
getting you to as complete a monitoring report when you bring it to us, as not so much about us telling Mark what we want to see in it. I think it's more to the extent that it can be helpful in informing and bringing a complete.
Yeah, I don't know if that necessarily
Yeah.
belongs in this monitoring report. It might be more about what the process looks
Yeah.
around
Right.
monitoring itself. It may
Yeah.
not be
Yeah, yeah.
the-
And that sort of reference
Yeah.
was more if that's helpful, and certainly I know you've asked many times for us to be providing some feedback on the back end of these things
Right.
to be helpful.
I
That
had
was
just
Yeah.
two quick things. One is, and the word when Kim and I met that I think I used was, yes, you can't direct, but also what we're talking about, you really shouldn't be trying to influence either. And I think by way of just the relationships we have as parents, conversations with teachers or administrators, even though it's not your intention to influence, they see you as they don't see you as parents. They see you as board members. And so even what seems to be a benign conversation may in fact be interpreted as you're trying to influence my thinking as a teacher. So that's just something to be cognizant of. So even though I don't see David very often, I do enjoy your company, but when you guys say stuff to me individually, I'm thinking, okay, are they? And I'm the superintendent. I feel that's you would try to influence my thinking on that, or so that's one thing. The other piece is there was a document, but we must have gotten lost. I was just looking for it. Called the superintendent's job description. So that's not a policy, but it's a mother load of expectations, and I think that you need to have a job description for the superintendent. So if we're talking about evaluation now, not necessarily 3.2, but one of the things when you went through the session with me last spring is I don't know what you were working off of. You had some qualitative things you want to give me feedback on, but in the future, if this is to remain as something to give me feedback on, stuff that's not related to organizational performance, then I would work off a job description, because that's rich with, there's no thou shalt nots, there's all you shall. And the treatment, the executive limitations stand are all what I shouldn't do, which is very liberating because I can do lots of stuff, but you might want to bring the JD out and say, well, if we want him to do certain things like be more communicative with families, then let's pull it off a document that already exists. And maybe you might want to make that smaller because it's 4 pages.
I was going to say, because I couldn't find it after you and I.
Should be on the human resources.
I looked under my site, but it
No,
wasn't there.
it'll be on your
So even after you and I
It's
spoke,
very impressive. He can do all that stuff.
Well, the last time I remembered it was when we were doing the search for you.
Yeah.
So that's when I remember the job description. So I don't think we've necessarily referenced it since then.
So it may not belong in
But
policy,
that
but it's a companion
makes sense
document.
that that
And it's
would
in that
have
document someplace on the
It
website?
used to
rather
be.
than,
It's
you know,
HR.
a moving
Yeah,
target.
that,
So
well,
Of course it's
that'd be
HR.
fine then.
Of course it's-
And I didn't put,
Is
say
there a-
specifically job description because I couldn't find anything. So.
I probably opened a can
Not
of
to go
worms
on-
now.
not to go-
Now wait till you get that evaluation.
It doesn't include light bulbs, though.
Do you think it's possible to meet every thing suggested in your job description?
Not on one day.
Today it was about lunch.
Not to go off on another tangent, but is there a way to search for that on the website?
We might want to put it under my page.
No, but I mean like a search. Is there a
there's
search
no
thing?
search.
Oh, and there's not a search button.
Is there ever going to be a search thing?
No,
Why?
because
I don't-
the
Doesn't
tool
allow.
doesn't support it.
Headline doesn't allow it.
The current
Oh,
architecture.
that's,
Maybe he doesn't want his job description presented out there.
So anyway, I don't want to
Okay, now
derail
that
the
I-
conversation,
and
but
either
just
we
to.
can add it as a friendly amendment, or we can
No,
do it without it, and then because that's you and I talked about it, and I couldn't find it, so I didn't
Yeah, I
use
just
it.
want to remind the
HR.
board that
HR
Specific?
for all job descriptions.
Okay.
I think
So
we're
we-
talking about
I-
process at this point.
Yeah, I think so
I
too.
don't think it
So
needs
To get back to the
Everybody have a motion?
policy,
Okay.
if there's no more questions or feedback about the policy, I will entertain a motion, please.
I make a motion that we accept policy 3.2 as presented.
Good job.
Is there a second?
So,
David seconds. Any further discussion? Thank you. All those in favor? Aye.
no,
Are you saying yes or no?
I'm saying I'm not in favor of this policy as presented, despite my second.
So you are voting against the,
Yes.
Like 4 to 1.
okay. Do you want
My
to,
right and privilege.
do you want to explain your vote?
No,
Okay.
I think they're proud of it.
No, he
No, no.
seconded, but then he voted,
Against.
he
So
opposed
pass
it.
4 to 1.
I seconded it so that we could vote on it. Nobody else jumped forward.
That's you've got the first vote for it.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. So I wanted to jump to the other document that I had you open, Mark.
We're fine with
Okay. So I shared with everyone this afternoon a document that Rachel and I had worked on over the past week that, well,
He presented it to me to discuss like this, and I'm like, oh, great.
so the
Okay.
the document attempts to do 2 things. This is about our engagement plan with the community for this year, for this academic year. So what I tried to do was I didn't bring hard copies of
Okay.
this. Sorry.
Okay.
But I did share it with you on Google Docs.
Okay.
So 2 things. I try to capture the essence of our conversation last week about what our thoughts were around engagement. And then I also tried to flesh out a little bit for the members of the board what are some of those things that we might do and what's the order in which we might do them. So, for example, we talked about a survey. We talked about continuing to use the Essex Reporter as a way to reach people with important messages about our plans for the year. We talked about using one of our budget development meetings as an opportunity to engage our stakeholders about, outcomes and the costs. We talked about, working with the U46 board to talk about are there ways for us to have this bigger conversation as a K-12 opportunity versus just a K-8. We also talked about reaching out to the Rotary, finding some way to interface with the Heart and Soul initiative that's going on in the community right now, which has a lot of great traction. And then Mark also suggested, I think, the opportunity to engage our legislators on an annual basis, which I think we've done pretty consistently, but it might be time to revisit that approach. And then these were some of the either methods or groups that we talked about connecting with in the coming year as a way to engage folks in that bigger conversation, the great conversation. So PTO, Heart and Soul, U46, Rotary, Senior Center, CHIPS. And then we've also identified sort of those vehicles for communication, including the Essex Reporter, Front Porch Forum, our Facebook page, Alert Now. And we left sort of a hanging question about how do we engage students in this conversation, and is there ways to do that? So what I propose, what Rachel and I sort of came to is this general timeline, which I think is completely up for your scrutiny and feedback as to whether or not it makes sense to do some kind of a survey to be determined what those questions would be that might help us understand the current understanding of what our stakeholders want to get out of our schools, how relevant our current policies are, and what some of the gaps might be, and use that survey information. So hopefully present that survey without jargon, without policy framework, but more to get at the heart of the matter, and then to use the information that we gain from that survey to help guide our communication efforts moving forward for the rest of the academic year. And those things could include a budget forum, some initiative working with Heart and Soul, the U46 outreach event, and possibly a legislative discussion. So the timeline is an attempt to take all of the big ideas and to say, if we were only going to do 5 of them or 6 of them, this would be a heck of a lot more than we've done in the last couple of years. So even this, I think, is ambitious for us because it represents a lot more work outside of our regular board meetings. So this is being presented tonight as a framework for our engagement opportunity in the coming year for your feedback. And I realize that this is kind of the first time you're seeing it all captured in this one document. So if you're able to tonight, I guess what I was hoping that we could get from you, from fellow board members tonight, is some thoughts and opinion on whether or not a survey is the right tool for us to try to use to begin this conversation, or whether or not we should skip it and try to find another way to initiate the conversation with the community.
I'll say I think it's perfect, because I think we need something that really casts the wide net. And I think that's a survey. I'm not quite sure what the best way to put it out there is.
Right.
Whether it's, mass email, Facebook, Alert Now, I don't know.
Or maybe all of the above.
All of the above, I think. Essex Reporter.
Yeah.
To cast as wide a net as possible, because that just kind of lets everybody know, hey, we're talking about this. If
Right.
you want to talk about this, we're going to be talking about this for the next 6 months.
Right.
And, a bunch of parents are going to get it and go, great, whatever, check. I really don't care to have the conversation. We're not even turning the survey in. But those that do want to have the conversation
Right.
will be alerted to it through that wide casting net of
Dave.
the survey.
Going beyond what Dan says, if we start with a survey, we can then evaluate which direction we should go in next, perhaps by the number of fish we catch in the net.
Sure.
And maybe one question on the survey should be, do you want to be contacted to be part of this
Yep.
discussion
Yep.
in a more in-depth way?
That's a great idea. Kim, any thoughts as to the survey as a tool?
I like the survey as a tool. I think maybe circling back after the survey so we share results,
Yep.
I think would be helpful.
Right.
Makes people want to complete the next survey. And I am wondering about the timing around the legislative discussion. It will be too late to
Influence.
influence
Mhm.
anything for the session.
Right.
And so I'm not sure the benefit at that point, to be honest. I think minimally our legislators should be invited with a personal invitation to every other event.
Right.
What if we just switch to March and May? And put legislative session in March?
Even
Well,
by March, things are beginning to
They are.
wind down.
Almost a better time would be in the fall, like this time frame before they get started, wouldn't it?
We could be deliberate in an invitation in one of the December meetings.
Right.
Let them know. I forget, Mark, where it
We're not in
says.
session till January, so
I
I
know,
mean,
but our local legislators then
Yeah,
may be
they'd
that
come-
much
they'd
more
come out, yeah.
available, and that's all I think we were talking about probably to maybe give them a glimpse at which of the meetings, Mark, were you going to give us sort of the, not just the rollover, but talk about
16th.
budget areas
16th is the hopefully first draft of the budget.
with the budget area conversations around
The 9th would be that.
the ninth.
Yeah.
The more the tying it to the ends
Mm-hmm.
conversation. It's a different way of looking at budgeting, and I think it would be an interesting opportunity to have them see how we do budgeting, maybe. That it is really looking at it in the context of outcomes for kids. It is the bigger conversation at the state level, but it is not in practice the way even some of the most disciplined and experienced PG boards are able to do it necessarily. So budgeting becomes a whole different beast. Some do, I think, approach it from outcomes for kids, but I think many still do line by line by line.
Right. I think you're right. The question.
So
the
I
question
don't know if that's
from-
something we'd be comfortable with, but I don't know otherwise what effect we have in May with them.
No, I think you're right about May, and I kind of, as I typed it, I sort of said, geez, this probably doesn't make a lot of sense. I want to also, though, be thoughtful about the conversation that we continue to have about whether or not this particular board meeting is the right forum for these kinds of conversations. It's efficient if Mark is able to provide a presentation that describes how we think about the budget and the ends and making those connections, but it might not be the right forum or the right tone. You know what I mean? So his presentation is geared to us. Asking him to also think about presenting it to other stakeholders that also have sway in Montpelier with statewide issues might be a different kind of presentation. So I just think we want to be thinking about what's the most, how do we want to engage legislators, and is it about impacting public policy that might occur in the coming session, or is it about just pulling them into our process more globally as another stakeholder? Right, because we've talked about our role in terms of public advocacy. So I just want to make sure that we're clear. Is it an opportunity to advocate and to lobby our legislators, or is it more about pulling them into this conversation, the great conversation about education?
Yeah, and I'm not sure what that answer is. I would say that the tone, as was evidenced by the end of last session, is about schools are spending too much money. People are going to get back to the consolidation conversation. I mean,
Right.
it's at the end they were just looking for any opportunity to jam something in there. Not necessarily our legislators, not necessarily
Right.
all legislators, but the money committees, some of those money committees in those education financing areas were on a bit of a tear at the
That's
very end of
right.
last session.
That's right.
And I I think, and I wouldn't want to unduly burden Mark's presentation to us, because I've felt in the past that that version, that particular meeting, as a matter of fact, that version of budget discussion is very child-centered and is the compelling argument that becomes our conversation to our community around why we're asking for support for $21 million or $20 million. So, but again, I don't want it to have to be some sort of theater, because we've got different guests coming.
Right.
It is a very different way, though, to look at investment in education as opposed to cut expenditures, which is the conversation that when the money committees get together in January going through the end of the year,
Right.
that's what they're looking at, the best intentioned people. That is,
Yep.
if a few people get to see another way of looking at education investment, they've at least seen a different way.
Right.
I'm not sure what other influence we can have, and I don't mean to sound dire that, that what else can we really do?
Right.
I'm just not sure what it is.
Well, I guess my only sort of additional question about how to engage legislators, especially in inviting them to come to a meeting, I think they're used to having something to do other than just receive. And so how would we facilitate a conversation with them versus just coming to receive information about how we develop budgets differently perhaps than others? You know what I mean? I think they'd be looking, they'd be asking, well, what's my role in the meeting? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And traditionally, their role in the meeting has been to inform us what's going on in Montpelier.
Yeah, we have asked that.
What's going to affect us in the future that you guys see coming? What are the big issues? Which I think.
It's a great question.
Yeah, I think that provides us a lot of value.
I mean, they're all fairly senior and tenured down there, in that they may very well have a sense of what to
Right.
be expecting. I know committees are meeting already.
But I wonder if they have a better sense of that in terms of what might develop during the session toward the end of January.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what we've heard from them in the past, is that, well, we're not really sure yet, you know, get back to us in January once we've had a chance to sort of kick off the rust and get back to our work, even though committees do meet during the summer. Do you have any
What
thoughts,
do you
Mark?
think, Mark?
I mean, I think we can ask, your legislators well. I mean,
Yeah.
what's on their agenda? You know, the VSA has put together their list of top 5 that they want to be quasi lobbyists on in the legislative session. So I'd rather take it from a growth orientation. I think where VSA likes to do is to say this is bad public policy and this is going to cost us money. That's important to inform legislators, but I think messaging is really important in Montpelier. So I think telling the story that's happening in Essex Town, so Linda Meyer and Debbie, others can go down there and talk about what's working in education. And I do think there's some value in talking about what's worth celebrating. That said, we're facing, once again, a difficult budget situation. So trying to influence their thinking around what that state tax should look like, what the base amount should look like. Because those are some pretty scary numbers up there without any investment. So I think let's talk about what's right, help us share that story, and then here to try to close the gap in performance, which is the big discussion. Here's some further investment we have to make, and you need to be advocating for good policy in that regard. So they passed the law, Act 77, on personal learning plans. Great idea. And yet they haven't done any analysis in terms of what that's going to cost. And it's going to cost money. If you really want to do it right, personal learning plans doesn't suggest that you keep kids in their classroom all the time, for instance, necessarily. So, but there's been no analysis of that. So I think there is some recent legislation in the past that I wouldn't mind hearing. Do you know anything about this? And, or SBAC, or Common Core, some of these really big shifts. I think having a front row seat on what that means to local districts would be important.
Right.
They also like to talk, and in some of these things I've done in the past, it's not necessarily what is really helpful for moving forward. So I think you have to maybe reach out, and maybe there's a joint agenda with the board sharing some of the work that's happening, and then hear from them.
Right.
What do they need to know more about.
Do you have a sense on timing, Mark? What would be, like, is there a place in there you see that more naturally fitting to give them a different way to see things? Is it
I think
earlier on?
I
Is
think
it
earlier the better. I think
so December or January?
January.
Even
When did
Jan-
we used to do the piece of pie?
I thought we did the dessert in January.
Yeah, so
Oh,
winter
the
time.
Right?
The thing that we do with CCSU.
Yeah,
We
Maybe
haven't done that.
asking
We didn't do
Judy if
that
that-
last year.
We didn't do it.
we didn't do it at all.
Oh.
Mm-mm.
That should almost be a joint meeting, Town Junction, U-46,
Yeah.
all
But
associated.
I think it would be I think they do budgeting differently than we do. So if it is around
Clearly.
this notion of a different way to look at investment in education, I am not hearing that that's common in the state. At least the very overt linkage in our conversations around how these investments are aligned with the strategic plan for achieving outcomes for kids, and that is something that has been refreshing in the last couple of rounds of budget cycles, that has really been the way we've discussed it. And it's not just lip service. You're sharing, why this money aligns with this idea.
Right.
And it's the stuff that we sort of go back to when we're referencing future budget presentations, because it's stuff that the rest of the community hasn't necessarily spent as much time with. But it's probably the meatiest stuff
Yeah.
that we discuss. So I think you're right. I think they probably want to be both an audience and have an audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that at least for the delegation that represents the town, I don't know how close to the action they are with education policy, or I
Right.
don't think anybody's on a major finance committee.
Martha
is on the appropriation.
She's on
Martha is,
appropriations.
of course.
Yeah.
So I do know that I feel like I remember with Challenges for Change,
Yeah.
when they were here,
Yeah.
they were very surprised by the restraint that our towns had had.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were a typical taxpayer in that
Right.
situation where not everybody remembered or understood where we had been the 3 years before. They were as pleasantly surprised maybe by the information we shared in that
think you're
setting
right.
as any layperson off the street. And so there's some benefit in that too. It's part of what, clouds or
Right.
affects their thinking as they go into their work.
So I guess the question.
I still don't know what the answer is, but
Right. So I think so. I'm hearing two things as a result, as it relates to the engagement plan. I'm hearing number one, we should begin developing questions for a survey to be deployed in December, and so perhaps you and I could work on an initial set of questions that we would then share with the board and Mark and get your thoughts and feedback on. We don't want to sort of kill them with like this long survey.
No, it's gonna be shorter.
Yeah.
obviously, with them,
So,
short,
I mean, I hate to volunteer you, but you and I could work on some of those questions together and then share them with the full board, with the idea that we would deploy it, maybe the second or third week in December, second week,
Second,
preferably. And then the other question around, yes, we want to engage with legislators. The question for me, I guess, is when is the appropriate time? And it doesn't sound like we'll have our ducks in a row to really do it justice on a December 9th timeframe. So maybe we come back for our next conversation about linkage and community engagement. We talk about what that engagement might look like if we did it in January.
the budget forum you're talking about, Brendan, is that something that might circle back to the aligning resources with N's conversation?
Well, to Dan's point, it might be an opportunity to provide that broader picture for folks that haven't had the ongoing education that we get at the board table around budget development. So that might be one of our meetings where it's not so much about us, it's about providing that context for the community.
It's about us communicating.
Yeah, and being able to sort of answer those larger questions or paint that bigger picture that we get over the course of many meetings.
And the risk of us having repeat visitors is pretty slim. So
Right.
if we repeat it for our sake, but we get to January and we've heard it maybe twice, that's probably okay. Because it may be, I guess it'd be unnecessary if nobody else came. But if we
Yeah.
probably make that meeting that talks about, we say it's a budget meeting and we've invited our legislators and they may be able to share get 2 bangs for the buck or something on that with folks
Right.
coming out to hear from their esteemed board and superintendent at the same time they hear from their legislators.
Might be a draw.
Mm-hmm.
The survey, is it a general, is it the taxpayers of, who's the audience? Who's the recipient of the survey?
I think the stakeholders, the owners of the
Okay,
district would
okay.
be the audience.
So it deserves, I think, there's a science behind it, as we all know. I'm not a director of marketing. It might be worth, I can do the research. Brendan, I'm sure you've got some skills and background. When I survey, it's at a micro level with targeted stakeholder groups. This is a pretty big undertaking. So the science behind, like, what your methodology is, is there a digital platform, or is there a mailing? I think there's a lot to it.
Right.
So I don't know if there's, and again, I can put a query out to the VSA membership on who has used a community survey, which is not a novel tool. In fact,
Right.
when done well, it can provide a lot of good information, but also could give you a bunch of stuff that's not useful.
Right.
So I don't know if if that makes sense to research first what's the best way to approach
Sure.
that.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be we don't want to do this for nothing, and we don't want to.
We really need to think about what is the information we want to get that's going to be useful,
Right.
and just trying to target that
Yeah.
sort of
So
information.
it might be ambitious. The 9th might, I guess,
Yeah.
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 With the holiday
Maybe
in
after the
between,
first of the
too.
year type of thing.
Right. If we need until the first of the year to develop the right survey, then that's fine. I think we want to make sure that the tool is a tool and not just something that continues, that confuses us, or we don't want to be more confused than we already are. So I think that's good advice. So we can look into some of those questions before we tackle the actual format or specific questions that are in the survey. What's the right way to go about that? And if you have any resources to share,
Yeah, I'll
that'd
start
be great.
thinking about that. Yeah.
So we are over our time. I apologize. It is 9:21.
Gosh.
So the last item on the agenda is any feedback for me or Mark on the meeting, future agenda items. I think we're all now on the same page about our next meeting taking place on December 9th, not December 2nd.
And 4.9 is up next, and Ben did it, so we have no risk that any of us couldn't volunteer to do 4.9.
What is 4.9?
4.9 is self-evaluation, board self-evaluation.
I feel like it's been forever since I've done one, so 4.9.
Yeah, board self-evaluation.
Let the record show that Dan has volunteered to do 4.9. Thank you. And I want to thank Kim for taking 3.2 as well. Thank you for doing that.
My only suggestion on the future agenda and items was what we just said before was,
Yeah, I'm just looking to see, I don't see that mark. Oh, no, I'm sorry, 2.5. That's the only one in December that I see marked.
on December 9th.
Yeah, and 2.5 is,
Senior breakfast, yeah.
see, if you had your book, you would know.
It's right
No,
underneath my
Dan.
chair.
Dan.
I didn't want to run off the book here last time.
Emergency superintendent succession, which will,
Should be a
I
pretty-
seem to recall, sort of pro forma, like you update us on any
There's no need-
personnel changes
I'm
in
not
that.
gonna give you any different type of evidence that I've already given you.
Good.
That's a good one.
That
See,
seems
we
like a
just did,
very
we did
simple.
a good process.
Yeah.
But I mean, so yeah, my comment is
Knocked
just
it off the list.
for all agendas. What's on the agenda for next week, so
The
that we have a
monitoring.
chance to
Yeah,
what
the
monitoring.
question we say is, does the board work calendar need to be modified, but we're not specific to say, assign or discuss future monitoring reports.
Right. Right. So
Obviously,
next meeting, that'll be a good one to add.
just change that language a
Okay.
little, I think we're good.
Great. Any other business to come before the board this evening? Motion to adjourn?
I'll move that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Non-debatable. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
David says nay.
Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight.